I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You dare once in your life.
Hi, people. This is Trish Wood here. And of course it is, because this is Trish Wood is Critical, the podcast that indulges in and celebrates the lost art of critical thinking. Today, we have what can only be described as a reasonably dark show. We've done quite a few dark shows, but don't run away from it, because it is emblematic of the capture of both our culture and our humanity by ideology. These two things kind of coalesced around the same time, sort of in my inbox. One of the stories is that of Richard Bilkszto, who was a very, very highly regarded high school principal who recently committed suicide, it is claimed, as a result of having taken part in some so-called anti-racist training supplied by the Toronto and District School Board, in which events took place that it does seem to be credibly documented affected his mental health in such a way that he recently took his own life. And I will tell you, I'm not going to reveal it, but I do know the way in which he chose to end his life. And it is a way that removes any doubt whatsoever that he wished to die in that act. That's all I'm going to say to protect his privacy and that of his family. But this was not a cry for help. This was a man who wanted to end his life and who was in enormous pain. And what has happened subsequent to that story breaking, and I will say John K. of Quillette has done some great reporting. He never comes on this show. I don't know why, but he's done the best reporting ever on this. And you should seek it out. And I will be putting some of that reporting in a Substack tomorrow with some accompanying documents for you to read to understand this better. There's little doubt about what happened. He had some events that challenged his character occur in some very public, meaning there were 200 people on these Zoom calls while the training was going on, 200 colleagues and superiors from TDSB. He was accused of being an enabler of white supremacy and a resistor of anti-racial thinking. I mean, just awful, awful, awful things. And all he did to deserve that in the minds of the person who said those things to him was challenge an assertion that on its face is, in my view, and historically provably absurd, which is that Canada is more racist than America, which has a history of slavery and many other terrible things. We're not perfect up here. But he challenged that assertion with some experience, having also taught in Buffalo. And that seems to be what ignited this whole ongoing mess. Now, lest you think that Richard Bilkszto's death is being used by the kind of what are they're now calling the anti-racists. In other words, people like me who think anti-racist training is dangerous and based on a fallacy, to make hay, to make a point. And of course they would do that. And we always have to be sure that that's actually not what we're doing. We cannot use people's deaths and twist them for our own ends. That's equally wrong. And you will notice that from last week's program, I did read the death announcement and I didn't go any farther because I didn't have the information I needed to really speak intelligently about what happened to Richard Bilkszto. I now do. I now have seen the essentially the Workmen's Compensation Board, it's called the WSIB now in Ontario, document that verified his claim of having been bullied and psychically harmed by those events. I have also seen the legal document in a case he filed against the school board, in which transcripts of these taped events are included. So I don't have any doubt that what is said to have transpired actually transpired. I doubt very much that his lawyer, Lisa Bildy, would include falsified transcripts in a legal document. If she did, she'd lose her license. So that's not on. There are tapes of these events. The Star claims to have a couple of them, and I will deal with the Star's response to this story in a minute. But we're going to take a long, hard look at how and why this happened. And it is as much about our institutions being captured, and people who will sit on a Zoom call like that, watching a beloved, even revered, honorable man be chastised with what are, in my view, having read these documents, false accusations without even peeping up. We are cowed. You want to know how all of these bad things happened in history while people stood by? Well, this may give us a little bit of insight into that, because I don't understand it at all. I really don't. And the other part of this that is as troubling as can be is that since the story broke, some people who are into the anti-racist ideology are not saying what I believe caring people would say in these circumstances. They would say, wow, something's really gone wrong here. Maybe we should take a step back. Maybe we need to take a step back, honor this man's life for a minute and a half before we start throwing rocks, and figure out if maybe in our well-meaning trainings, I'm sure that some of these people who do these kind of trainings actually think they're doing a good thing. I'm sure they do. I think they're wrong-headed, but I'm allowed to say that. But let's just say that they do think that they're doing a good thing. They should be frightened by this. They should be taking a step back and reviewing everything they're doing and everything they've done to figure out how they know when they're taking it too far, if in fact that's what happened here. And there are indications that that's what it was. Are the people doing these trainings certified in psychiatry or psychology at all? You know, you're putting them into what is almost a professional counseling situation where major accusations are thrown publicly against people, like the Salem witch trials, that they cannot argue with because it's a tautology. If you argue, you're racist. If you argue, you're challenging their lived experience. Even if what they're saying is not borne out by facts and data, you cannot challenge it. And that is what Richard Bilkszto did. He challenged it. And I probably think that he's right. I think Canada is not as racist. The trainer believed apparently because we have a monarch, but actually the Commonwealth was one of the first places in the world to outlaw slavery, like way before the Americans did, way, way before. So this is a tragedy, and this is the capture by ideology of our institutions, our schools, the people who work in them, workplaces. I have a list for you also from the website of this company that did the trainings that lists all of the people who sat there and listened to this while this company got paid, I think, probably pretty significant money based on some of the stuff I've read, to be told that they're racist and that things we think are normal behavior like fact collecting and truth are racist, and that we cannot challenge the worldview of a black woman who's doing the training. You can't challenge it. You can't. People have even said on Twitter that the reason Richard killed himself was because he couldn't bear the pushback as a white man by a black woman. That's what they're saying, right? Not a tear for him. Not a tear for him. I mean, it's shocking. This is exposing a bunch of stuff. Not only what goes on at those things, but also it does say something about what is going on morally and ethically, maybe within that I don't know what you call it, community or business or I don't know what they're called, but the fact that there is not humanity being reflected back on this story, even if they don't want to accept responsibility for it, is saying something very scary to me. It really is. So we have an interview today with a man named Michael Tepper, who was a friend of Richard's and knew him from some educational campaigns, and they talked a bit about what happened and how surprised Michael was to hear that this happened. People knew that Richard Bilkszto was in bad shape psychiatrically, although he had good days too. But I also, just because I like to do the reporting here, right? I took my time. I got the documents. I've read them. I did some research also on what wrongful convictions and wrongful accusations made publicly do to human beings. And it ruins us. It is a major psychiatric and traumatic event. And that cannot be overplayed. I've said this on the show once before, and I'll say it again. Because, well, first of all, it happened to me when I left the CBC. False allegations were made publicly. And I very, very nearly didn't live them down. I was in therapy for a very long time trying to put my life back together. But also, Mike Wallace, the tough guy from 60 Minutes, who I was always trying to be back in the day, was sued by General William Westmoreland over Mike Wallace's coverage of the Vietnam War and what he said about General Westmoreland. And it was kind of a false allegation against Mike Wallace, right? This guy suing him in that way for libel. And Mike Wallace said it put him into a very, very deep depression. He almost didn't get over it. He did think of taking his own life. And eventually he won the case. So things maybe went back to normal for him. But these are not small things. Being accused falsely of something, like being supportive of white supremacy, supporting white supremacy, whatever the phraseology is. I've seen the transcript, so that's what happened. It's something you can't really live down. And then, just to add icing to this cake, so you fully understand, his career went downhill as well. It wasn't like he went back to work and everything was fine, and then he decided to end it all. His career trajectory, which had been impeccable and on an upswing, collapsed as a result of this. So, wow, he was 60. You spend your whole life being a wonderful teacher and principal and a decent human being, and it's gone in a flash. So, as I said last week, there are always multiple factors involved in this. Is there a straight line? That's probably for the courts and the investigators, now that this has got a public profile, the story, to find out. And I hope they will. But I think one can declaratively say that what happened in those trainings played a role. And even the people who are saying, oh, he did it because he couldn't take guff from a black woman, are in their own way suggesting the same thing. They're also drawing a line. So you can have it both ways, right? So the headline, just let me tell you this, from the Toronto Star. It's an opinion piece with opinion in really small letters. A Toronto principal's suicide was wrongly linked to anti-racism training. Of course, that's what the Star said. Here's what was really said. Okay, she got the tapes. I've seen the transcripts of those tapes. And let me tell you something else, that the woman who wrote that story, that opinion piece, actually, not a story, is the Star's anti-racism reporter or something like that. And let me just, here it is. Her name is Shri Paradkar. And in 2020, it looks like January 2020, she was thanking the woman who did the trainings with Mr. Bilkszto for coming into the Toronto Star. and doing race trainings there. So here is she tweeting out, many star journos got a depth of contextual framing of equity today from this woman. It's her Twitter handle. My fave quote, uncritical benevolence concretizes superiority. Okay, there's so much wrong with that. My hair's standing on end. These new words that are invented for these various, a lot of it is McKinsey speak, some of it is anti-racism, some of it is they're all inventing these crazy new words, right? They couldn't say solidifies, a normal word. It's concretizes, right? It's ridiculous. But what's interesting about that phrase from the very woman who went after Richard Bilkszto for suggesting that Canada was not as racist as America, is that he was not practicing uncritical benevolence. He was giving her the respect of saying, with all due respect, I disagree with you as an equal, let's hash it out. But when he did that, he was accused of supporting racism. So you can't win. So she's even contradicting her own ideas here. This is a really, really sad story. And so the second guest we have today is on a completely different story. But again, we're looking at a situation where ideology is driving common sense. This is the story of Garnet Harper, a 35-year-old, lovely, big, friendly, smiling guy, very vocal about his opposition to vaccine mandates, who was struggling with very, very severe, it would turn out, kidney disease, couldn't get a transplant, died from a reaction to dialysis, which obviously he wouldn't have been on if he could have got a transplant, right? But they refused it. And they refused it because he hadn't been vaccinated. They even refused a living donor from one of his brothers. So these are kidneys that would not have gone to anybody else anyway. They weren't taking one off the list, but they wouldn't do that either and gave no explanation for it. So this is a very, very interesting story. And I speak to his wife, Megan, who is really a tower of strength and tells an amazing story from a very, very powerful perspective of what she witnessed. And I think she's doing it to honor her husband, you know? I think she wants his death to stand for something. And for Garnet Harper, vaccine mandates were it. Denying people medical care like transplants, that's an important issue. This is not the only case in this country. And what's interesting about it is people who have transplants are on immunosuppressive drugs, right? So yeah, maybe they do have a worse case of COVID, but the corollary of that is that vaccines prevent transmission to the person who is compromised, and they don't anyway. They don't. So this is more safe and effective. Line up and get your shot, safe and effective. We aren't going to argue about any of the actual realities of what this vaccine does or doesn't do. So we have an interview with Megan Harper, the wife of Garnet Harper, coming up right after we speak to Michael Tepper, who is a friend of Richard Bilkszto. Difficult last name. Lots of consonants in there. Trying to get it right. Before we go there, let me talk to you about how we need your support, which is greatly. We really do. And we're so very grateful for it. I look over the names of the people who have committed to us every month, and my heart fills with gratitude. You're the reason we can keep going. This can be a lonely gig for me. And even I have a producer elsewhere, and I have an EA named Dorothea, who is also magnificent, also elsewhere. This is how we kind of work these days, right? So I do feel your support coming in when you make these little pledges to the show through my Substack account. And I couldn't be more grateful. And I feel like we do have a movement here of critical thinkers. And we're talking a lot about COVID policies still, and we will be until the day we die, probably. It is such a huge and monumental screw up. It's like almost unimaginable. It's like ridiculous. It's so big. How could they do it? And so we're always going to do those stories, but we're branching out a little bit because there are other things happening in our world that represent the same kind of stupidity, ideology, cruelty, inhumanity. They're all captured in the same little ugly basket of the times that we live in. And if you're not watching Neil Oliver on YouTube with some of his commentaries about this, you probably should be. He's my spirit animal too. I have a lot of them, but I always agree with Neil because, like myself, I really approached everything about COVID after the science part, which I was not bad at interpreting. I'm not as good as Alex Berenson, but not bad. I was a science. I can read a study. I know how to do that. But I really approached it through the lens of, wow, are they not even thinking about how cruel this stuff is? Do they not care about the harm they're doing? Are they doing a risk-benefit ratio around the lockdowns? I mean, right? And they weren't. And so those of you who've been here since the beginning will understand that was a very difficult burden to carry, and it changed forever the way I view everything now. Right? So that's what we're doing here. And the Substack is the vehicle we use for collecting support because it's a completely free speech platform. I don't have to worry about them getting mad about something I've said. And with all the debanking and stuff going on all around the world right now, that's no small thing. I need to know that the money that comes into me is going to be sent to me and not canceled because I said something that one of the 30-year-olds in the office didn't like happened to Nigel Farage, who is winning every fight on this. So you'll be happy to know that. So I would be grateful if you would contribute. You do get premium material too, about once every couple of weeks, maybe a little bit more than that. You might get a show. You might get commentary. You might get something early. Lots of little goodies coming down. So please do consider it. I know a lot of people are asking you for support these days, but we've been here for 3 years, not faltering, committed, and trying to build something that is sustainable in many ways. Having a happy staff, credible programming, a place you can come. We don't blow whatever way the winds are blowing. And I'll say this to you so you understand. There are certain people involved in the COVIDian dissident movement that I have not had on this show. And there may well be a reason for that. I don't just book anybody on here who has something negative to say about Tony Fauci or vaccines, because not all of those people are correct, right? The end game that they hate Fauci, that's easy to justify. But I'm doing journalism here by as much by how I curate the show as by how much research I do before I actually do a show, right? So understand that. I know I make it look easy, but it's not. It's hard, but I love it, and I love you, and I'm so grateful for the people supporting us. So my Twitter is info@woodreporting. We get a little spicy on there sometimes. I do it first thing in the morning, and sometimes I'm a little ornery, but it's fun. And I have an Instagram as well, and my website is trishwoodpodcast.com. We drop the show there too. But we are putting the show on Substack with a story, so you can comment on a show on the Substack. And then we're putting the accompanying documents that I use on the show with the Substack too, so you can have a look at original documents, so you know I'm not BSing you. So there you go. Please support Trish Wood at Trish Wood is Critical. We'd be grateful. So let's move on now back to the story of this terrible suicide of this wonderful secondary school principal in Ontario, Canada. It may be an Ontario story, but the craziness is happening all over the West right now. In UK, for sure. In America, yeah. In every province in Canada, yes, it is. So I'm going to give you, first of all, this is from the WSIB report that was done that approved payments to him because he experienced trauma and bullying on the job, which came through these training sessions. So they investigated it. So I want to read that to you so you know it is the real deal. Background. You are employed as a principal replacement, retired secondary for Toronto District School Board. You have been employed here since September 1st, 1987. You report a sudden onset of mental stress after 2 sessions with a public ally speaking on equity on April 26, 2021 and May 3, 2021. You sought medical attention due to your symptoms with your family doctor, who is named, but I won't say, and began treatment with a psychologist, Dr. So-and-so, on May 11, 2021. You were in regular treatments with Dr. So-and-so and followed up with other Dr. So-and-so on June 6, 2021. As per the health professional's report, Form 8, compiled on June 6th, you were diagnosed with anxiety secondary to traumatic workplace events, and you were advised to remain off work until August 21st, 2021. In the letter from Dr. So-and-so dated June 21st, 2021, you were further recommended to remain off work until July 1st, 2021. So that's what happened with the background allegations. And this pretty much sums it up, so I'll just read these. On April 26, 2021, you attended an equity meeting in which the speaker made several statements that Canada is more racist than the United States. As you have experience teaching in Buffalo, New York, you stated that Canada's society is a more just one than the United States. You report that at this time, the speaker put you in her crosshairs, that is Richard's quote, and publicly humiliated you during this meeting in front of your co-workers, calling you a white supremacist and resistor. Words to that effect is what I would say, having read the transcript. You report that you attempted to move forward with this, although you began to experience mental stress symptoms, such as anxiety and insomnia. On May 3rd, 2021, in a subsequent meeting with 200 of your colleagues, the speaker continued to harass and humiliate you further, doubling down on the reference to you being a white supremacist, supporter of white supremacism, and that you were a resistor, meaning of anti-race theology. You reported that the speaker spoke about you for approximately 1 hour in this manner and attempted to vilify and demonize you in front of your colleagues, including senior administration. The speaker continued to state that you were, in quotes, a problem that TDSB had to deal with. Your recounting is supported by several colleagues, including Mr. R. Nigro, who is also the vice chair of the Toronto Administrators Association, who wrote an email in support of you to the senior administrators who were present in the Zoom session. Mr. Nigro confirms that 11 other colleagues present in the meeting contacted him to discuss the way you were treated by the speaker and stated that the conduct of the speaker was offensive and outrageous, with the intent to publicly humiliate you and cause reputational damage. On August 13, 2021, employer confirms that they do not dispute your retelling of the incident. Now, let me just say that the Toronto Star columnist who wrote a piece completely discounted this, not factually necessarily, just it's not a good report. I don't know if she's accusing of all of his witnesses of lying or what, but that's what they're doing. Based on the information on file, says the writer of this document, I'm satisfied that the conduct of the speaker on April 26, 2021 and May 3, 2021 was abusive, egregious, and vexatious and rises to the level of workplace harassment and bullying. The evidence demonstrates that the speaker purposely chose to address you publicly twice, calling you a white supremacist, I will add, or words to that effect, and resistor in front of 200 colleagues and senior administrators. This conduct took place for over an hour, and noting that the speaker had sufficient opportunity to address you privately, it would suggest that the speaker did so with the intent to cause reputational damage and to make an example of you. I don't know if we can agree that that was her intent, to cause reputational damage, but that's what she's saying here. You were also referred to as a problem that had to be dealt with. This is supported by the email provided by the employer that was sent from the vice chair of the TSAA, Mr. Nigro, who was also present at this meeting, and your employer does not dispute your recounting of events. Essentially, she agrees with everything he said about what happened to him in those training sessions. And that document also verifies that mental stress was caused as a result of that. What it doesn't really talk about there is that his career was also kind of kaput as a result of what happened. We are going to talk now to Michael Tepper, who was a friend of his, and he's going to explain what he knew about the case and what might have been going on in his friend's head. By the way, just to say, this is not just a friendship, but they were, the two of them, advocates together on some educational issues. So they did campaign on a couple of things together. Anyway, here's my interview with Michael Tepper. Michael, I guess I'll start by asking you what sort of a person Richard was.
Richard was a very dedicated, passionate teacher and principal, and he really genuinely believed in the potential of success for every student, the way he was describing his history over 24 years at the City Adult Learning Center. And I came to know him about, I'd say, a year ago, as we were working on trying to get the Toronto School Board to reform its lottery system, which it implemented effective as of this year for admission to the specialized programs. A number of us, including Richard, were very fundamentally opposed to that idea on principle. And we worked really hard to try to get them to reconsider, but we were up against a wall of indifference. It's a specialized program. It doesn't attract, the whole issue doesn't attract a lot of voter attention.
So you work with him on a couple of campaigns. That's interesting.
I worked with him on a couple of campaigns. He struck me as being a very honest, reasonable person, very responsible. I would even say he was the voice of reason at our internal meetings when people would come up with ideas that were a little bit off the wall. He would be the one to calm them down. He was a very direct, honest person, and very concerned about the welfare of his students.
And if you look at what is written about him in some of the documents that attend this case, apparently he was well loved and well respected by all. I mean, this guy, Richard, was not a controversial human being before this race training stuff, anti-racism stuff entered into the picture, right? I mean, he was a flawless educator.
Absolutely. And it's not only evident from what you hear from the people who knew him. Even if you go and look at some of the legal case reports, if you go on what's called the Canadian Legal Information Institute and you look up a couple of cases where he gave evidence, such as a Human Rights Tribunal case back in 2001. And the adjudicator, even back then, 2011, even back then said that his testimony was credible and reasonable and right on point. He was the kind of person who would just tell it like it is, be very honest and very caring. And I'm just astounded by the vilification that's going on and the crocodile tears that are being wept. Oh yes, he was we're so sorry about his suicide, but he was this and he was that, or he was manipulated by these dark malevolent forces. I just see these cheap attacks coming in, and it's really disgusting.
Well, we'll get there. I want to ask you about just more generally, obviously. Did you ever see him behave in a racist or white supremacist manner that would suggest that he had these kind of dark thoughts, dark ideas that he was accused of, or appeared to be being accused of in these training sessions?
No, I did not.
Well, first of all, I just want to ask you this, I guess. How did you find out that he had killed himself? How was that message delivered to you, and what did you think about that when it happened?
I actually received the message from one of the members of our group the day after it happened. He killed himself on a Thursday, July the 13th, and I found out about it on the 14th in the morning, and I was just floored. I thought that this was an alternate reality. I just couldn't believe this is what I was being told.
Why did you find it hard to believe? I mean, what was going through your head?
Because I attended a dinner with him and about 40 other people in a group that had met at a restaurant downtown Toronto about 3 weeks earlier, and he gave absolutely no signs that he was contemplating anything like this. It was just. I just was thunderstruck. I couldn't believe it because there was no evidence in any of the meetings that I had had with him, and he had come to my house. I'm broadcasting this interview from my study, and he was at my dining room table. I could see where it is and where he sat, and he just gave no indications that this was even a remote possibility.
Yeah. So he was, according to the WSIB report, which found that indeed he'd been traumatized and psychically scarred, he seemed to be functioning at least, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. For
sure. But hindsight always has 20/20 vision, as the cliche says. And when I look back on the last live meeting that I had with him, he did make a remark at the end of the dinner that he was troubled about the lawsuit. He was bothered by it and about the impending character assassination campaign that would be launched as soon as his lawsuit would go public.
Yeah, because I thought that there was a sense that there was some indication that these events played into his suicide.
I don't doubt that they did. Now, you don't know. I don't know. As far as I know, nobody knows exactly what thoughts were going through his head in the hours before he did it or the days before he did it. Mm-hmm. We can guess and we can speculate and we can reason and infer. And I think that there is a connection between what happened and the experiences he had in the lawsuit and the way he was treated. There is definitely a connection. What is causality? What percentage of the reason? We can guess and speculate. I don't know. Let me be clear about that. We don't know for sure what happened. I cannot make extraordinary claims that I cannot prove. But what I can say is that based on my experience, he was deeply troubled by the whole experience. This I want to be very clear about. Yeah. This experience that he had in this EEI training session inflicted, from what I had talked about with him, profound emotional damage. It really got to him. He had spent 24 years of his career, and his career was his life. And what he had done in that career was devote himself almost exclusively to his students. Yeah. As far as I know, he did not have a personal life. He was a member of the LGBTQ community, but he did not have, to my knowledge, a steady relationship. And his life was his work. And the fact of the matter was that following this seminar where he complained, he found himself progressively frozen out of his career. Yeah. He was being, at least from his perspective, systematically denied principalship positions following his retirement, which is customary for retired principals to be able to take these kinds of positions. And he felt that he was being systematically frozen out of them on account of the fact that he complained about what happened to him, and that he was at his wit's end as to how to restore his reputation.
Yeah. Well, how does one in those circumstances? I don't know. I think that being falsely accused of something is maybe one of the worst things that can happen to a person. And we certainly know, I actually looked at the psychiatric literature before embarking on this episode, and it's pretty devastating to try to clear your name from something like that. How do you prove you're not racist?
Well, that's a darn good question. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove you're not this or not that? It's a Kafka trap, especially the way some of the players in this field operate, which is if you deny that you're guilty, well, that's evidence that you're guilty. Yeah. So what do you do? What evidence can you provide? I can go back to this 2011 decision where it says, I find Mr. Bilkszto presented a reasonable and credible, non-discriminatory explanation as to why he believed the applicant's teaching skills and ability to relate to students and staff were not strong and were of concern to him. He provided a coherent account of how he arrived at his assessments of the applicant's teaching based on a number of direct and indirect sources of information, including the observations of the applicant in and out of the classroom and the feedback he obtained from students. This is a Human Rights Tribunal decision going back to 2011, what the adjudicator is saying. Now, is that the characterization of a right-wing racist nut job? Yeah. It just makes no sense. Going back throughout his career, he was the epitome of reasonableness. He was Mr. Middle of the Road. And to see him characterized as being on the fringe and having some kind of secret agenda is, to my mind, just bizarre and wildly defamatory. And I'm not the only person who's saying this. There are very respectable people on social media, such as commentators such as Warren Kinsella, who are saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, well, it's hard. Like I said, it's hard to prove a negative, isn't it? And that is why this whole paradigm is so very, very, very dangerous, because having read the documents connected to this, that what he did that was so terrible, apparently, was to challenge an idea that Canada is more racist than America. And having taught at a school in Buffalo, he challenged the idea, would seem politely. And that after that, he, that it felt like, it reads like he was being targeted and bullied by the woman doing those trainings. So, there's no, when you read these cases, it's like there is only tautology, right? There's no way in, there's no way out. If you challenge it, you're, enabling white supremacy. If you don't challenge it, you're letting what you believe to be a mistake be perpetuated. There's no winning in that situation, which tells me that psychiatrically that's very hard on people. And I think that's why this is so dangerous, because the people hiring the consultants don't seem to be factoring in the mental trauma that may be perpetrated on the people who are taking these trainings.
Well, here's the way I think it played out with Richard, because he's a very honest and direct and straightforward guy. He's sitting there listening to this presenter. What he's hearing is completely at odds with his 24 years of teaching experience in both Canada and the United States. He understands that this presenter might have some expert knowledge on matters of diversity, equity, inclusion, if that's an area in which there's expert knowledge possible. And yeah. I'm not sure of that. But he knows about his teaching experience, and he's hearing something that's completely at odds with it. That's, as far as he's concerned, complete rubbish. And he feels compelled to speak up. He has two choices. He can keep his head down and his mouth shut and just let it all wash over, or he can speak up and ask a question. He picks door number 2, and he ends up paying for it, and possibly even with his life, because this presenter chose to respond to his question as a direct personal challenge, and introduce Mr. Bilkszto's own racial background into the equation when that was never a factor in the first place. She just couldn't or didn't take his question at face value and decided to refer to the fact that Mr. Bilkszto, well, at least appeared to be white, and then characterized his question or his objection as being based on the fact that he was white. And that's the classic ad hominem logical fallacy. Oh, you're just saying this because you're such and such. In other words, she's dodging the merit of his argument and just characterizing his argument as invalid because of his background. Richard reacted in a very was really taken aback by that, I'm sure, as most reasonable people would be. And according to evidence, he went to his supervisor at the Toronto School Board after the event and said, do I really need to go back to this training? I'm not getting much value out of it, and look what happened. And he was told to go back there, and they didn't take his complaint seriously. And then he goes back there, and then the presenter says, well, I couldn't believe my luck. Here he is coming back again. Look at this perfect example of resisting. As if she's leading some kind of a cult movement where rational thought has to be suspended and is characterized as resistance. And it's my way or the highway. And I can see why in front of 200 of his teaching colleagues, he would find this profoundly humiliating. It's really hard to live down when you're almost in so many words told that you're a racist or that you're perpetuating racism or something along those lines. It's impossible for you to defend yourself, and you find yourself trapped, and your entire 24-year teaching career is now discounted, and you find yourself under a cloud. And what do you do?
Yeah. That's a very interesting way of putting it, because I'm sure that having people looking on with no one jumping in to defend him, as I understand it, and then not even having the board jump in, it must have felt awful. I mean, those things are so traumatic for people when you're, can we use the word bullying? I think the WSIB used the word bullying in their characterization of it.
Oh, yeah, I'd call it bullying. And what I also find astounding is that out of the 200 people there, and these are not children, they're educated professionals. They have equivalent levels of experience as Richard. Not a single one came forward to object. Not a single one took his side or even tried to be neutral and said, let's move on. I think that we've covered this point long enough. Can we move on to something else? No one came up to him afterwards. No one came forward to give evidence. And even now, after he's died, not a single one has come forward. And I find that remarkable.
Well, these things always end up feeling like a witch hunt because people are afraid, right? What happened to him now is so scary for other people to come forward and take his side, although they did with the WSIB report, but he did have a lot of people supporting him. But people are afraid and intimidated. And that is why we are in this mess right now, because people are exactly afraid that if they speak up, that they'll be accused of some terrible racist thing or supporting white supremacy or whatever, and we can't have that, and we shouldn't be having that in our school system. Do you know are these race trainings or these anti-race trainings, whatever they're called, are these happening in the classroom as well? Do you know if it is?
I don't know if it's happening in the classroom. I suspect that it is. I suspect that whatever is happening at the professional training level ultimately percolates its way into the classroom. And speaking of the intimidation that you just mentioned, like what happens if you speak up and you object and mention that there's an issue? So I just want to mention as a case in point, our local trustee, Wei Dongpei, sent an open letter to the to the director of education, asking for an update on the situation in her leadership report at the next regular board meeting, which is taking place on August 30th, and also asked if any further interaction between the board and the Kojo Institute will be suspended pending the results of the investigation. And at least in my opinion, those are entirely reasonable requests to get an update as to what's happening, and also that until this whole mess is sorted out, that the service provider not be invited to have any further engagement. Whenever there's an investigation that takes place, that's normal. When a teacher is investigated, they are normally put on home assignment, so why shouldn't it be any different? And guess what happens? On social media, two of the most prolific teachers who comment on these matters start photocopying sections of the TDSB Code of Conduct for trustees and inviting people to submit a formal complaint to the Integrity Commissioner in case any trustee has broken their code of conduct. So immediately the accusations start flying.
So what are you suggesting, that trustees are being intimidated in some way, or that they're being?
Yes, I am. Yes, okay. I am, for sure. Yeah. I'm suggesting that trustees who dare to ask any questions about what's going on are being intimidated and being threatened with a code of conduct violation.
Well, so what is the status now? I understand that the education minister is doing some kind of an investigation, so that's fine. Has the TDSB not put a moratorium on going forward with this stuff? I thought they had.
No, they have not. They have not announced any moratorium. The only thing that they announced is that they are conducting an investigation of their own. Yesterday, they issued a press release that announced that they are retaining an organization called the King International Advisory Group, which they describe as an experienced and well-respected investigative firm with multidisciplinary expertise. I did a little bit of background research last night, and I discovered that indeed they are a well-respected investigation firm. Their primary area is actually insurance claims, but they have done investigations in this general area. So I really can't object to the retainer of the King Group. I'm curious as to their mandate, though. I think what's really critical, because the Toronto School Board hasn't announced exactly what they hired the King Group to do. What are the terms of reference of that investigation? What is the scope? Are they investigating Mr. Bilkszto, or are they investigating the TDSB, or are they investigating the Kojo Institute? It's not clear from this press release what they've been hired to do. It's also not clear as to how this internal investigation that the TDSB has commenced with this third-party service provider is supposed to square up with the Ministry of Education's inquiry. And it's also not clear as to exactly what kind of inquiry the Ministry of Education is undertaking. Steve Lecce simply said he's going to have his staff look into the matter. Well, is it a matter of the minister's personal staff looking into it? Is it going to be some kind of official inquiry under the relevant Ontario regulation under the Education Act? What kind of investigation is going to take? The other question that I have is, where is the coroner's office in all of this? Normally, when a death occurs through unnatural means, the coroner will conduct an inquest and perhaps even impanel a jury. And I haven't heard a peep about any involvement of the coroner's office. And it's, to my mind, I don't know about you, but I think it's really strange that the Toronto School Board and the Ministry of Education are conducting investigations into the circumstances of the death of an individual, but the coroner's office is not.
Well, and they're investigating themselves in a sense. I know they're bringing in some outside organization, but
that's exactly right. They're investigating themselves through a third-party investigator. Now, that's one step up from just doing a complete in-house investigation, but it's still, they're hiring an outside investigator to do what they want them to do. And the question is, how transparent is this investigation going to be? What is the scope? When is it going to end? Are we going to get to see the results? Who are these investigators talking to, and what evidence are they collecting?
And, for me, are they even going to ask the right questions? Because I'll tell you where I am right now, and this gets more horrifying by the day, because the longer this story runs, and let me shout out Jonathan Kay, who's done some excellent reporting on this. I don't know why he won't come on my show. He won't, but I bear him no malice. He's done some great reporting on this, even though we disagree on some issues on other topics. But I am waiting for somebody in the milieu of the so-called anti-racist training community to express some regret, some condolence, some deep thinking about this. Wow, we're going to take a step back and see what happened here, and if we can do things differently. There's none of that. Absolutely none of it. And that's what scares me the most. That stuff happens. Well-meaning people can make mistakes and go too far. All true. And the only way we remedy these things is if the people who've are in the community or have made the mistake or have been a party to it in some way say, wow, we're getting together, we're thinking this through, and we wish Mr. Bilkszto's family, our heartfelt apologies if they're warranted, and it seems like they might be. But I'm not hearing any of that. What I'm hearing is that Richard had the audacity to challenge a Black woman, and that you can never do that, right? That the reason he was upset was because she didn't take his nonsense, which is absolutely, based on what I've read from the transcripts excerpted in the civil case, not what happened at all. And what we're left with is that anybody who's not Black can't ever criticize a Black anti-racist trainer, that it's proof in and of itself that you're a bad person. And that can't stand as a paradigm. It can't, because in and of itself, it is bullying and unkind and destructive for people. So I want to hear someone say something else besides what's being said right now.
Well, the school board's official statement says, the board would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the family, friends, and colleagues of Richard Bilkszto. Richard was a strong advocate for students, particularly for those in the adult and alternative education. Throughout his 24 years in education, he worked hard to create an environment that fostered student success for students of all ages. So we have our basic bare bones, neutral, lawyer-approved statement of condolences.
Well, that's from the board, but what about from the people who do this training, this industry?
Oh, not a fee.
That's what I want to hear. Because the people on Twitter and other places who are involved in this kind of thinking are blaming him for challenging a Black woman. That's what they're saying. And so, the TDSB has its own problems, but I want to hear from the people doing this kind of training that they're having a second thought about this and looking at what happened with neutrality to make their industry less aggressive.
Well, you can look long and hard for that, but it's not likely to happen.
These ideologies that you cannot criticize, that become cult-like in their power, are we've got to relook at this stuff. We really do. There are good people involved in it, I'm sure. There may be good people involved in this too, and things just kind of went sideways. But blaming Richard and not talking about it openly is really, really dangerous, because that's sort of how we got here. When people can't speak honestly about what they're thinking and feeling, and that means people of every color, all of us, then this is what you get. And it's just, it's brutal. Yeah. They're talking about this case around the world right now, as I understand it. So that's really interesting. Yes,
I've heard it's certainly hit the American media in New York, and it's gone to New Zealand, to the UK. So it's making the headlines, and it's not putting our local school board in a good light. This is not what our school board should be worldwide famous for.
Thanks very much for this, Michael. I'm very, very grateful to you, and do keep us in the loop, would you?
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. that was my interview with Michael Tepper, who was a friend of and kind of a bit of an activist with Richard Bilkszto, who had a very, very difficult time after some anti-racist training. Before I move on from this, there's a couple of things I want to say because I am doing some reporting here as well. I'm not just booking guests, but I've been spending a few days looking at this case. Here's another response. This is a guy named Devon Singh who tweeted out, "If Canadians want to do nothing about our racism, then let's be open about it. Otherwise, we better believe Black women, protect Black women." Right? I mean, what? We're really out here proving Black women right. I mean, so there's no way that you can complain about what a Black anti-racist trainer is doing. You have to, didn't we go through this with the Me Too movement, who were the last bunch to try believe at all costs and see some very good people go down? I mean, we can't keep doing this. And that someone would tweet, like, the victim here is Richard Bilkszto. Why can't we see that? Can a white guy, a white teacher who made a polite challenge, are we not allowed to claim victim status here? It's just shocking to me, the casual cruelty of this ideology. That is what is connected here. These ideologies are inhumane and cruel. This tweeter didn't say, this is terrible that this happened to this guy, but we've got racism, we got to deal with it. No, believe all Black women, protect Black women. We better believe Black women. Oh, okay. That's ridiculous because nobody's right all the time and white people aren't wrong all the time. And if that's how we're going to move forward, we're going to have a lot more crises and tragedies on our hands. And I'll tell you one more thing. I hope and pray that this stuff is not going on in the classroom and that the people taking these trainings are not carrying this into the classroom, because if this guilt and shame is being fobbed off on our children, we've got a problem. And hey, you know what? I'm not saying there's no racism. There is racism. Of course there is. But anti-racism training is not the answer. I'm with Christopher Rufo. It's only making things worse. And the smart people out there on the school board and the smart people in our classrooms, or at least they're supposed to be smart, should be rejecting this. You know what happened? George Floyd died and everybody went insane. That awful, awful videotape that shocked and horrified us all made otherwise good people and good institutions say, oh my God, let's put a BLM flag in our social media and do some kind of training to show our guilt for what happened to George Floyd. You know what? Only one white person killed George Floyd, and we know what his name was. And by the way, that name was used in the racist trainings as they were talking in the context of Richard Bilkszto. I've seen it. It's in the transcript. A mention of Derek Chauvin. It is mentioned. Like we're all Derek Chauvin, all white people. I reject that to the marrow of my bone. But I think what happened is that the George Floyd tape happened. We all went a bit nuts, including myself. It was so awful. I've praised that young Black girl who stood there and filmed the whole thing on her phone. And I know that there are a lot of people saying, well, he died of a fentanyl overdose and oh, this and oh, that. You know what? Whatever George Floyd died of, Derek Chauvin, by holding him down and not getting medical attention and not paying attention to what he was doing and not paying attention to George Floyd's needs and medical needs, killed him. I'm sorry. I know that's not a popular opinion, but that is mine. There's just, in my view, no way you can absolve him of that. But you can absolve the rest of us of that because we didn't do it. But good people, everybody was scared. Corporations had their BLM flags and taking a knee and everything. And that's when this really, really got going. Companies and school boards and institutions and corporations were desperate to claim the mantle of anti-racist training and flagellate their staff and flagellate themselves on the basis of some ideas that are not supported by data and facts. And in the world of postmodernism, if something's not supported by data and facts, they use the phrase lived experience. It's a moving target. You can't argue your way out of it, because if you say support it with facts, they say you're racist, only racist people, right? And this, I will tell you something, that this institute is called the Kojo Institute. Let me just, before we move on here, let me just read you some of the companies that have purchased this training. Interac, National Ballet School, York University, H&M, Loblaw Companies, looks like the Metro Toronto Police, the Drake Hotel, Toronto Live, We Rise Together, York Region, Halton Catholic School, FCDC, the Redwood, London Family Court Clinic, John Howard, Independent, Elizabeth Fry. So lots of government dough, right? Toronto District School Board, Peel School Board, Elementary Teachers of Toronto, lots of school boards in here. The CDC, okay? Centers for Disease Control. Now that's very interesting because, and may I include the CBC, our beloved national broadcaster, in that as well. Let me just say something about the CDC. They are the place where, when the vaccines were first coming out and some people thought they actually worked, did not want to give them to the most vulnerable people because they were old white people. They said it was racist to give them to the people who had the biggest chance of dying from them. They didn't want to give them. That's what happened. That's what racist training, anti-racist training does. It's ridiculous. Let's see the agenda. The Toronto Star, as I said earlier, yes, now defending racist training, and this organization in particular, or anti-racist training. I believe this story is going to go on for a while. And what you need to know is that the Ontario Education Minister is doing some kind of an investigation. And I think the TDSB is part of that. And I hope they cut all of this out until we get to the bottom of it. And I would humbly ask that if we're going to send people into these situations, which are very dicey and not unlike group therapy, they're not unlike psychological counseling, that they have those credentials so they know where the danger zones are and where they shouldn't push and shouldn't continue to push because it's bad for people's mental health. I wonder how many of these trainers have psych degrees or have PhDs in psychiatry or whatever. You know, I don't know. I looked on the website for Kojo and I couldn't find out what her qualifications were beyond that she knows how to do this. I don't know what her background is. But anyway, they are shining a spotlight on this now. Will it be properly investigated? Unclear. You heard Michael Tepper say, why isn't there a coroner's investigation? Of course there should be. But everybody's so afraid to speak out against this that we may not get a fair result. People are really, really intimidated. See what happens. What happened to him? Everybody's afraid it's going to happen to them. It feels like the Salem witch trials, right? If you speak out. I'm sure everybody in here is doing the best they can, including the people on the other side of this argument, but they really do need to take a step back and start thinking about what they're doing because it's hurting people, right? They would claim they're being hurt by racism, rightly so, but if that is actually the case, I don't think it's the case in some of the situations they're talking about. But of course, if you're Black, you've probably experienced some racism. I don't discount that, but I don't believe this is the way out. I know I'm precluded from saying that because I'm not the right color, but I'm sorry. I do think critically, and I don't think this is the way out. It only makes people upset and scared and mad. And then they accuse you of white fragility, right? So what did I say about a tautology? There's no way out. You can't criticize it. They've got an answer for everything. The anti-racist training people. So there you go. Let's move on. Very, very sad story. And the other one is not exactly something that is going to cheer you up after this, but it is something to think about because it's another story about how ideology ended very, very badly for somebody. And the somebody it ended badly for was a 35-year-old chap named Garnet Harper, by all accounts, a wonderful bloke. Every photograph of him, he's grinning from ear to ear. He was a happy warrior in the vaccine mandate dispute. And he died of complications from dialysis because of his kidney disease. He'd been prevented from getting a transplant because he was not vaccinated. And he couldn't even use a live donor kidney from one of his brothers because they just wouldn't even do the surgery. So these were not kidneys that would have gone to somebody else. They were only going to go to him, and he still couldn't get them. A very interesting interview. I talked to his wife about whether or not this was a hill to die on for him, if he'd had a chance to get a vax and have the surgery then at a different time, would he have taken it? Very, very interesting answers here for a very determined young man who I believe was on the right side of history and whose death does expose the dire straits we are in the world of medical ethics right now. And medical ethics are a huge deal. They decide who gets what treatment, how to triage, what value you have. We're in a country now where MAID, which is this physician assistance in dying stuff, is absolutely out of control. It's a huge exposure of how our medical ethics are collapsing in a post-COVID world caused by the inhumanity of COVID that was accepted by many, many people. This is an important story. And I think Garnet Harper, in his own way, I don't agree with his choice, but who cares what I think? It was his life. So let's hear what his wife, Megan, has to say about Garnet Harper's life and death and his struggle with kidney disease. Hi, Megan. How are you?
Hi, Trish. Good morning.
Yeah, how are you holding up?
It's day to day, sometimes hour to hour, really, but I'm doing okay.
Yeah. When exactly did this happen? What day did Garnet die?
He passed away on May 22nd, 2023.
Wow. So that's quite recent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that a lot of people have been discussing this case, and obviously to you, your husband is more than just a story, but the background here, it seems to me, is pretty important, not just because of what happened and how it applies to other people, but because it seemed so important to him as well in many ways. So let's maybe start by having you paint a bit of a picture about who Garnet was, as a husband and a father, and who you knew him to be.
Sure. Yeah, it's been a privilege in some ways to be able to share him with the world, because he was truly an amazing person. He was full of life. He was a family man. He had incredible energy, and he was a very passionate person. He had a real charisma about him. He was a very extroverted individual, loved making connections and building relationships with anybody that he came across. I mean, he would talk to anyone, and he was a very critical thinker, and he took a lot of pride in that. And he had a really strong sense of justice. He was a very courageous person too, and had a strong drive and determination about him to make sure that what is right is what is done.
Interesting. I get the sense of him too from some of the photographs of him that he was a bit of a happy warrior too. Have I got that right?
Oh, he loved it. He was so, he had like I said, he had a strong energy about him. He was a very joyful person, and, a very, very positive individual.
And angry, driven by anger or not anger? I'm wondering what was his kind of motivating force, do you think?
I mean, I'm not going to say he never got angry. He absolutely did, especially in the face of these sort of injustices. But he you could consider it as more of like a righteous anger. He was a very passionate person, and he wore his heart on his sleeve always, and so he wasn't driven by anger. He was driven by justice and to make sure that there was equality in the face of discrimination.
Yeah. What do you mean by that, equality in the face of discrimination?
When there is a policy that is put in place that disqualifies certain people from the rights that everybody should enjoy, that is discrimination. And so people don't like to think about what happened during COVID as being discriminatory actions on the part of the government or the medical system. But in reality, that is what had happened. And when these policies are put in place and they disqualify someone from receiving medical care or from being able to keep a job on the basis of their personal and medical choices.
Yeah. I mean, I identify with him somewhat, although I did not pay a price as he did. But I do identify as a person who, like Garnet, and I think my listeners do too, saw much of what happened during COVID-19 as a grave injustice, as anti-human, as cruel, even as exposing something ugly about our public health system and even our medical system. I feel a lot of us kind of share that now. Was that driving him too?
Absolutely. I would say it certainly was. He most definitely held to the understanding that coercion is not a choice. And so when there are high stakes on the table and something is being threatened to be taken away or being threatened to be made unavailable to somebody, unless they complete a certain action, which in this case was to get vaccinated with experimental injections, that's not a choice, right? That's coercion.
That's coercion. So let's talk about, he had some fairly serious medical challenges as I understand it. What were they? How was his health?
Well, he found out in February of 2022 that he was diagnosed with stage 5 kidney disease, which is also synonymous with end-stage renal failure. As soon as you are in stage 5, the treatment that's available to you is to do dialysis and then hope for a transplant.
Now, let me just stop you there for a minute, Megan. Was he unaware that he had kidney issues? Like, did he go from 0 to 60, or was he someone troubled with a kind of malfunctioning kidney who got worse?
No, we found out in February 2022 that he had failing kidneys. We didn't know that before.
Wow. What a shock that must have been.
It was a complete shock.
And did they give a reason for that? I mean, I'm just curious medically, how does that happen to somebody?
Well, my husband was a type 1 diabetic.
Okay.
He was diabetic since he was 9 years old.
Yeah.
But the rate at which his kidneys started to fail had all of the doctors scratching their heads, because for someone who's 35 years old, someone shouldn't go from 75% function down to 8%, as is what happened with him in such a short period of time. Normally it progresses more slowly, and then you have time to be able to prepare for the eventuality that you're facing.
Right. And so, sorry, did you ever get an explanation from the medical side about what precipitated this big drop in function at all, or no?
They blamed his high blood pressure.
Interesting.
For his kidney failure. Garnet had other opinions about what caused the very rapid decline of his kidney function. Unfortunately, it's something that it can't be proven, we've been told, but he was prescribed a blood pressure medication by his family doctor. His family doctor at that time, upon prescribing the medication, had not done blood panels, so he didn't know about where Garnet's kidney levels were. Prescribed this specific medication to Garnet. Garnet tried it for a week or two. I think it was 2 weeks. And then it wasn't making a difference. So then he called his doctor, and the doctor said, oh, okay, let's just double the dose. So he doubled the dose of his medication, again, without pulling any blood work panels. And then Garnet started to feel absolutely terrible. He actually went to a naturopathic doctor at the time because he said to himself, the blood pressure medication is making me feel even worse. I need to find another solution. So he went to his naturopathic doctor, who did his due diligence and ordered a blood work panel. And that's how we found out that he had 8% kidney function.
Oh, that's
and
terrible.
His family doctor called us back 2 days after the blood work panel was returned, and said, you need to stop taking that blood pressure medication I prescribed you because it's harming your kidneys.
Oy, oy. So what was the larger of his two issues? Was it obviously it was the kidney problem, right? Was the diabetes under control at that time, or?
Yes, it was under control. He wore a glucose monitor that told him every 5 minutes what his blood sugar was.
Right.
So he was able to adjust. He understood, obviously, his condition, having lived with it for 25 years, and had really good experience with making sure that his levels were controlled.
Right. So you get this crazy or must have felt like a crazy diagnosis of this really poor kidney function. What was Garnet's response to that? What did he say to you?
Well, I remember standing in the kitchen, and before any doctor had called us, because I wanted to know, I pulled up his, in Ontario with Life Labs, they upload your results online, and then you can go and you can read them.
Yeah.
I remember pulling up the readings and being completely shocked at what I was looking at. I think I was just staring at the screen with an open mouth, and he looked at me and he's like, "What?" And I didn't want to tell him. It was like, if I said it out loud, it was going to make it real or something. Anyway, so I shared with him what it said on the report, and then he just sort of stood there trying to absorb the realization of what that meant.
Yeah.
And it was just, like you said, it was just a complete shock.
Yeah. So then when you are diagnosed with 8% kidney function, then what? Is it transplant or die? I mean, are those the options open to you at that point?
It's dialysis while you're waiting for a transplant. But according to the medical community, your kidneys will never regenerate on their own. So once they have depleted to that state, then they won't come back. That's the narrative that they provide.
Right. I just want to segue a bit and ask you, what were Garnet's issues around being vaccinated?
He saw the COVID vaccinations as experimental because that was the official status they were given. He said that there was not enough science on a type 1 diabetic because they were left out of the clinical trials as type 1 diabetics.
Yeah.
There was not enough science. There was no science on people who were in kidney failure because, again, they were left out of the clinical trials. And he said, this is too risky for me. If I want to stick around for my wife and my kids, then I don't feel comfortable receiving a vaccine that we literally have no idea what it's going to do to my body.
Right. And so were doctors, or was a doctor who was caring for Garnet encouraging you to get it? And I'll just play devil's advocate just for a minute so you can respond to this. But there was a pressure from doctors, especially for guys like your husband who were compromised medically in a couple of ways, to get the vaccine because they were at more risk of a bad outcome from COVID, right? That's the other argument. So was there pressure from his doctors to get it? And if so, what was his response to that argument?
There absolutely was. We were told on more than one occasion that he had to be vaccinated if he had a hope of getting a transplant. And his response to that was simply, that's discrimination. And I'd like to see the policy and I'd like to see the science. And he was never provided with either.
Right. So then what? There was a point where the two of you realized that if he persisted in refusing to take the shot, that his life itself was in jeopardy, right? Dialysis cannot go on forever, and he would die. So I'm just wondering, what was he contemplating now? He does not want to take the vaccine. Dialysis cannot go on forever. So then what? Like, what options did you two have, you and Garnet?
Well, we explored living donor options. My husband has two brothers who stepped forward, both of them offering to donate one of their kidneys to him so that he wouldn't need to go through the organ donor list with all of the stipulations that are associated with that. But unfortunately, the way that the procedure happens in Canada is once you are working with a kidney specialist, you need to be referred by your kidney specialist to an organ donation program and accepted into that program for them to even consider performing the surgery or putting you on any list.
Even if the kidney is not coming off a donor list, but rather from a relative. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wow, that's incredible.
You would need to find a hospital or a facility that is willing to operate on you.
And as I understand it, the living donor kidney surgery it's not easy peasy, but it's not the biggest of deals either, is it? I mean, it's routinely done safely, right?
Yep. Yes. And an individual can live off of one kidney.
And what is the outcome for a diabetic with one living donor kidney? Would he have lived a full life, do you think, or?
He would have lived longer with that kidney than he would have lived on dialysis.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly what the lifespan was, but anything that's better than, 3 years at that point, right? Which is even less than what we ended up being able to enjoy.
And his brothers, did they qualify from a match perspective? Do you know if those kidneys were the right type, blood type, or whatever they look for there? Or?
No, because what happened was they filled out the donor paperwork, but then in order to actually access the recipient paperwork, you have to be accepted into the transplant program by way of referral. And the referral was where we were stonewalled. We never even got accepted into any program.
Because of what?
Because he was not vaccinated.
So I want to explore this. This is really interesting to me. And I will say to you personally that it really makes me fear for my country. I don't understand it. What was said to you and Garnet about why he was disqualified from a transplant that would have saved his life due to vaccination status? How do you justify that, especially given what we know about vaccines and them not even really doing, well, let's just accept that they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Everybody says that now, but how did they justify refusing him a life-saving treatment?
Well, I have the official reply that they sent to us to deny the referral. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, I would. Please do that, Megan.
It says, "Thank you for the kidney transplant referral for Garnet Harper. Unfortunately, at this time, due to the increased risks of morbidity and mortality in transplant recipients with COVID-19, our multi-organ transplant program has a policy regarding transplanting unvaccinated individuals. Mr. Harper's case was reviewed by the kidney transplant team, and as there are no medical or surgical exemptions to receiving the vaccine, he is not eligible to be assessed at our center. Please feel free to refer Mr. Harper to another center."
See, I don't know what they're saying there, actually. Are they saying that unvaccinated transplant recipients of this type of transplant, that there's data that shows that they have a higher rate of mortality from COVID than vaccinated recipients? I mean, are they basing this on data? What argument were they actually making from a scientific perspective or medical perspective?
I can only speculate, but it sounds as though they are referencing some sort of scientific data when they say that it says increased risks of morbidity and mortality in transplant recipients with COVID-19, as if you can't have if you have COVID, then you have increased risks of dying. by receiving the transplant surgery.
I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that you have to take anti-rejection drugs, which kind of compromise your immune system a bit, don't they? Would that be what they were arguing, do you think?
Well, that's what I've ultimately understood. It's not what it says here, but that is ultimately what I've understood about the logic behind rejecting this. Because if you get vaccinated for COVID or any other disease after beginning your anti-rejection medication, then those vaccines are far less effective because they are contraindicated with your immunosuppressant medication.
Yeah, I mean, did they run any clinical trials on people taking anti-rejection drugs and the COVID shot? Or, I mean, this feels like it's way, way out there, and a lot of people are guessing here, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this ethically, if you would just bear with me. Mm-hmm. Given that he may have had a higher mortality rate from COVID with the anti-rejection drugs if he'd been given a transplant, would you have understood if he'd just been kicked off the regular donor list? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is that the living donor list, where the kidney's not going to go to anybody else anyway, seems to be the place where their argument ethically kind of falls apart for me, right? Like, I don't know how you can. Is it just then at the point that we don't want to spend the money doing this for this guy because he might die? Like, I don't understand how they would go further with an argument at that point. What is your take, and what is your feeling about if there was evidence that he wouldn't have done so well, hypothetically, how would you see that ethically then?
I think that as far as a living donor is concerned, as soon as someone says, I'm donating literally a piece of myself, an organ or even blood, and I want it to go to this particular individual, I think that at that point, the hospital should have very little say over what happens in order to effect that have that surgery take place. And because I've seen the argument from in Ontario, our organ bank is called the Trillium Program. Yeah. And so the Trillium Program has this ranking based on survivability because organs are a precious resource. Mm-hmm. We can't risk putting an organ in someone who's not going to survive because there's so many people who are waiting for one. Okay. So then I understand in some ways, in theory, why they would say we're not going to be giving this organ to this individual because they're not complying with this particular requirement, etc. But as soon as it's a living organ donor coming from somebody, a family member, a friend who is saying, I've designate my organ for this person, can you really make those additional stipulations? Well,
I completely agree with you. And even on the first question, which I think you're being generous and thoughtful, there's lots of evidence that the vaccines don't prevent transmission anyway.
Right.
And that would have prevented him from getting COVID or even reducing COVID. Like the stats now around the vaccine are so corrupted.
Yeah.
And so many people I'll never forget Rachel Walensky saying, we've got to mask up again because the vaccines aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, at that point, all bets are off as far as those kinds of arguments are concerned.
That's right.
And what troubles me about your case, many things trouble me about this case, Megan, and I'm gobsmacked by how upsetting this must be for you. But it is the level of it. It feels punitive to me. It feels like were they struggling, saying, let's see if we can find a way to get this done, or here's a private clinic that might do it, or what can we do to save Garnet's life? Was there any of that from the medical community, or was it just letters and refusals?
It was letters and refusals, and then a lack of effort to find another solution.
What was your sense of why they were behaving that way?
I think that they were upset that Garnet wasn't following medical advice to get vaccinated. I think that they were upset that he resisted the vaccination, and they dismissed all of his concerns and legitimate questions and just said, well, this is just the way it is, And even after the rejection we received from London, which I read to you, they said, please feel free to refer Mr. Harper to another center. So we said, okay, well, let's try that. Right. And so, but there was no effort on the part of our care team to make those proactive steps. We even requested, like my brothers-in-law filled out their paperwork. They submitted it to Hamilton, the hospital. And then Hamilton said, well, we would need to have a referral of your brother to our center. So I requested that the referral be made, and I don't believe it ever was.
Wow. And just, I'm not trying to gild the lily here, but I do want to ask you, did you or Garnet have a sense that he was being treated as an anti-vaxxer, so to speak, that there was a taint around his case because he was refusing the shot?
It absolutely was. He was afraid at one point of going into the hospital. The first time that he was to meet with his kidney specialist, it was supposed to be in person. And then they called him the day before and said, we're going to need to do this over the phone. And it had to do with his vaccination status.
Jesus.
So, I mean, yes, 100%. I mean, it was well known. It's documented throughout his hospital file that he was an unvaccinated individual. And I do think that it impacted his care. Yes.
Wow. Was anything ever said to him about the fact that, like, were people who were treating him ever kind of reprimand him for not being vaccinated? I mean, how far did the pressure campaign go with him?
Yes, there was one point, actually, we were sitting with the infectious diseases specialist who, interestingly enough, was a personal acquaintance of ours from years ago. And he said, do you want me to beat around the bush, or do you want me to tell you to you straight? And we were like, well, we just would like to have your medical advice, you know? And he essentially gave us a very long lecture, almost like a father figure in some ways, about COVID vaccination and why they're so safe and effective and why it's so important. And you just need to get vaccinated and stop believing all your conspiracy bullshit, he said. So there was definitely high pressure. Yes. They sent in like personal acquaintances to talk to us. They sent in so many people to come and try to coerce Garnet into receiving the vaccine so that ultimately he would bow to the pressure of their demands.
Yeah. I guess the $64,000 question, Megan, is this, and forgive me if it sounds like a rude question, but I have to ask it or I wouldn't be doing my job. Given that he could have got a transplant if only he'd gotten the vaccine, why did he not compromise then his principles and do it to save his own life?
I just clarify one item before I answer that. And the item that I want to clarify is that my husband did not die from a failing kidney. He died from a stroke in the middle of the night, which is a complication of long-term dialysis.
Right.
And he was actively, courageously fighting stage 5 kidney disease. And the week before he died, he actually had the best week on dialysis that he had had in a very, very long time. His blood pressure was becoming manageable. He was, feeling more energy. He was sleeping better. And so his death really came as a complete shock to myself and my family because we saw that his trends were improving.
Yeah, but
he was winning his fight with kidney disease, right?
But let me ask you this though, but would he have gotten the vaccine at some point if he was really teetering on the brink of death, do you think, or not? Or would he have, that's what I'm struggling with here.
He was determined to be a trailblazer and fix the system for people who are coming after him. Mm-hmm. And so it would have been against his principles, against his character to cave to that requirement when he knew that it wasn't right. And he knew that he was strong enough to fight the mandates, but he knew that people coming after him probably wouldn't be. And so he was working very hard to, like I said, blaze a trail to make sure that it was easier for others who would come after him. It was his full intention to find a way. He was going to find a way to fight the injustice, either legally, like Sheila Annette Lewis is doing, or he was going to work on, get a referral to another center by using his strong words, because he was very good at using his words to affect change.
I guess what I'm getting at, though, Megan, is was this his hill to die on, and did he die on this hill, even though what happened was not a direct kidney death, is what I'm getting at? Because there are people who are struggling for transplants because they aren't vaccinated, and they may die, and some will die rather than get the vaccine. I guess what I'm asking you is, how far was he prepared to go? I mean, clearly quite far, but would he have gone all the way? Or if someone had said, Garnet, you've got a week to live without a transplant. If you take the vaccine now, we'll give you your transplant. What would he have said, do you think? I know that's really hypothetical, but just play ball with me here for a minute.
I can't see a situation where he would have ever said, okay, yeah, like shoot me up with the vaccine.
Wow. And what about you as wife and mother? I mean, did you, this is maybe unfair, but did you have a say in this? Did he say, what do you think, Megan? Or was he just kind of standing on his own on principle, or did you support that principle, or what?
I supported him all the way. I was his biggest fan, and I was a strong advocate for every aspect of his health throughout the entire process.
Wow. So tell me this now, my last question, I guess, Megan, but I would like to know how you're doing, and what is his legacy now? What do you want people to take away from this story? Because there will be people who say, I don't get it. Why wouldn't he take the vaccine if it would have saved his life? I don't get it. But how do you explain what was in his heart to people who just do not understand the decision that he made and the larger ramifications of it?
I think to a certain point, I've stopped trying to explain it to people who don't understand, because there truly is a barrier there.
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot of division, unfortunately. But there are just completely different perspectives where some people just may never really fully come to understand. But as far as my husband's legacy is concerned, we are very focused on building a better future for our children and for those who are coming up who need organs in the future in Canada. His brothers and I are working on building a nonprofit foundation to accomplish several goals. One of those is to make sure that medical choice is upheld in Canada. So that's one item that we're working on. There's a campaign that we've started. It's called For Garnet. And we are very adamant on trying to get medical policies changed and create some safeguards so that in the future, Canadians, Ontarians, they don't face these sort of really impossible choices based off of arbitrary policies that are put in place by hospitals. So that's one item. And then the other item is we're looking at building just community groups to make sure that everybody feels supported and they have people around them of like mind who understand the ramifications of these sort of precedents that are being set medically in our country, and who are saying, no, that's not right. Because I think that everybody's stronger when they have community coming around them.
Did you know he was going to die? Did you have a heads up of any kind, or was it a sudden event? And I guess I'm wondering if you recall the last things that Garnet said to you before he did die.
He passed away in the middle of the night. He had a stroke in the middle of the night. So I have avoided using the word suddenly in discussing how he passed, just because of the associations that come with that word these days. But it was very much of a shock. It was a very unexpected passing. Absolutely. Because like I said, he was getting stronger at the end, and he was going to beat it, and so it has been very difficult. The other item that I don't know if you want to cover is the Trillium program. They called to request his organs when he was dying. So I was sitting at his bedside, and the nurse said, there's a call for me from the Trillium Foundation. And so I agreed to take the call, and they requested if they could have my husband's organs because he could save up to 8 other people's lives. And I corrected the woman on the phone and said, you mean he can save up to 8 other vaccinated people's lives? And she said, well, I'm sorry, what do you mean? So she said she had no idea that these sort of mandates are in place where they are preventing people who are unvaccinated from receiving organs. And so it was a very, very, very difficult conversation, but I tried to stay calm and patient and offer her some education about what's happening in our country. And she agreed with me. She said that something that should never have happened. It's a very tragic story.
Yeah, well, it is a tragic story, and it does say something about this country that I'm really, really uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
And I think we all should be. Megan, thanks so much. Good luck to you and your children.
Thank you very much, Trish. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. And do keep us in mind if you have any announcements or anything you want to make about your progress here, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. So that was Garnet Harper's now widow, Megan Harper, left behind with 5 children after his death from an artifact of dialysis. He had a stroke of some sort, and he was battling mandates. That's what he was doing. Very interesting story. I'd be very curious to know what you think about that. So let's see, it's Friday. Saturday, the Substack will be out, and you can comment there. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about Garnet and his struggle, his health struggle and his anti-mandate struggle. Before we go, I promised you that I would find that quote, and here it is. This is the quote that Richard Bilkszto was questioning. Canada has never reckoned with its anti-Black history, whereas the U.S. has, she said. As bad as it is, Maclean's did a really great study. Maclean's magazine, right? Sure. Mostly featured Indigenous people, but it showed how we were more racist on a number of critical indicators than the U.S. So we are living in la-la land. And this relaxation that we have been doing because we think we have arrived and are so much further ahead, it has been really harmful to the racialized people in this country and practically the Black people in this country. This is the really egregious quote. We are stepping on necks. We are kneeling on necks. We are Derek Chauvining a whole group of people. Patriarchy is killing you. Capitalism is killing you. And white supremacy is taking your soul. But what do I know? That's what she said. I would probably take umbrage with that too. I am not Derek Chauvining anything. I don't dispute there is racism, and it's unpleasant, and we should all do our bits to stop it. But this is not the way. This is absolutely not the way. And I understand completely why he challenged, very politely apparently, that idea. So I just want to update you on the very important story about Nigel Farage being debanked. That was a big deal, wasn't it? Wow, that played out. If you're not watching GB News, you should be, because you can watch it on YouTube. And if you do a search, set it up, you'll see a lot of great programming on GB News that certainly affects my thinking here, because a lot of the globalist issues we're dealing with are playing out the same way in both countries. But as you know, the debanking of Nigel Farage by NatWest, but its little richer subsidiary, the snobbier version called Coots, blew up in their face. And it was because Nigel had a platform. He took them on and he won. But the weaselly way they tried to kind of steer and slither around this, including the woman who was running NatWest, now gone, he got rid of her. Nigel Farage got rid of her, right? Because one of the things that happened was she spoke to a BBC reporter about Nigel Farage and said that the reason his bank account was closed was because he wasn't keeping up his balance. And the BBC reported, it to be total nonsense. His account was cancelled because he didn't align with their left-wing politics. There's a 40-page document saying so. So she is gone, right? And the board may go too any minute, because the board initially said, we have total confidence in her. Her name is Dame Susan something. Forgive me, I don't have it to hand. So that's very interesting. Other people in UK had it happen. Canada set the tone when our wonderful truckers had their bank accounts frozen. But now, this is very interesting. Joseph Mercola in Florida, I believe, he's in the States, I think it's Florida, had his bank account shut down and his business account shut down, along with accounts of his CEO, his CFO, as well as their family members, including spouse and child. And they've refused to provide any reason for doing so. The oldest account has been active for 18 years. He is a COVID dissident. He runs what's called a retail health company, and they were terminated. Owner critical of COVID vaccines and FDA. They're coming for us all, people. So we have got to get together and start boycotting these places and telling our politicians, no, no, no. And as I said last week, the reason that Nigel Farage has triumphed is because he has a big platform. And Joseph Mercola has a reasonably big platform, but you almost have to have your own show now to defend yourself. This is coming to a person some dissident may be experiencing this soon. We got to stop it, people. This is a Chinese-style social credit system. We will give you access to the financial system if you hold our views. That's what's being done here, and it's shameless. Again, ideology on the loose. We have to stamp it out. That is my feeling today. Anyway, I'll see you on Substack tomorrow, and stay critical. See ya.